Hello everyone. Before we get started, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. That way, YouTube knows to keep sharing more stories like this with you. Now, let's jump in. Back when I was working patrol, there were certain calls that always sat heavy in the back of my mind. Welfare checks. They were routine enough, something every patrol officer had to deal with from time to time. But there was always a knot that settled in your gut the moment you were dispatched to one. Most of the time it was nothing. You knock on a door, maybe talk to a neighbor, maybe call the family member back and let them know that everything is fine, that their loved one just wasn't picking up the phone, or maybe their landline was down. But sometimes, and those times came often enough that you never forgot them, you already knew what you were walking into before you ever touched the doorknob. This was one of those times. The call came in from dispatch around midday. The sun was still high and strong, casting down on the pavement as we drove out. It was an out-of-state family member calling, worried about an elderly man who hadn't answered his phone in several days. The relative said he always picked up, and if he didn't, he'd return the call within the hour. They hadn't heard anything. They asked for a welfare check. They gave us authorization to enter if we found no answer at the door. And the moment we got that, my partner and I exchanged the look. That quiet, wordless understanding between two people who had already been down this road before. When we pulled up to the address, the house looked ordinary enough from the outside. A simple single-story place in an older neighborhood. The kind of house that had been standing there for decades. The grass was patchy, overgrown in spots. The paint on the garage door was flaking. The color faded to an off-white that looked almost gray. The blinds in the front windows were drawn, closed tight against the sunlight. It was the middle of the day, but the place looked like it hadn't seen light in weeks. No cars in the driveway. No signs of movement. We went up to the front door first, just to be sure. Knocked several times, waited, called out. Nothing. Knocked again, louder, silence. I pressed my ear to the door. No sound from inside. My partner tried the knob. Locked. We walked the perimeter, checked the windows. The curtains blocked any view. The back gate was chained shut and rusted. That left the garage. The garage door opened without much trouble, groaning as the metal rattled up along its tracks. The moment the stale air pushed out, I caught the first hint of what was waiting for us inside. It wasn't strong, not yet, but it was enough. That smell, the one you never mistake once you've encountered it. The one that sticks in your nose and clings to your uniform. We stepped inside, flashlights in hand even though the sun leaked in from the garage door. The light cut through and landed on stacks of old boxes, piles of newspapers, and bags of what looked like trash. The garage wasn't a place where someone parked their car anymore. It was storage. No, more than that. It was a hoard, floor to ceiling in some spots, with a narrow path weaving through it all. That path led toward the door into the house. The smell was worse here. Not unbearable yet, but strong enough that I didn't need to exchange words with my partner. We both knew. This wasn't going to be a knock and clear. This wasn't going to be us finding the man in good health. This was going to be the other kind of welfare check. I stepped carefully, following the little walkway between towers of junk that leaned and teetered like they could collapse if you brushed against them. Old furniture stacked in pieces, bicycles with rusted chains, plastic bags filled with who knew what. The air was stale, heavy, layered with dust that seemed to float in the narrow beams of our flashlights. Every breath carried that faint, undeniable stench. The door to the house wasn't locked. It opened easily when I pushed, and immediately the smell hit harder. It wasn't faint anymore. It was thick. You never get used to it, no matter how many times you've dealt with it. That smell of rot, of flesh breaking down in the air. It grabs onto the back of your throat and doesn't let go. We paused, letting the reality settle for a moment, then stepped inside. The living room was like the garage, but worse. More piles of things, random and endless. Boxes, clothes, food containers. It was the kind of hoarding where every available space had been filled until there was no space left at all. Just narrow channels through the clutter. My boots crunched over something soft that I didn't want to identify. The curtains were drawn shut, so the only light came from our flashlights. We moved slowly, clearing each space out of habit. Kitchen, more trash, more piles, rotting food containers, dishes stacked with mold growing inside. The air was humid and stale, suffocating in its stillness. The smell of decomposition got stronger with every step we took deeper into the house. I already knew where he'd be. They're almost always in the bedroom. That's where people go when they feel sick, when they lie down and don't get back up. We followed the narrow trail through the kitchen, past stacks of magazines, past piles of old electronics, into the hall. The bedroom door was open. My flashlight beam swung across the room, and I froze for just a moment before moving in. He was there, in the rocking chair. At first glance, it almost looked like he was alive, just sitting there. But the air told us otherwise long before we saw him. He was leaned to the right unnaturally. His body had slumped in a way that wasn't natural at all, like a marionette with its strings cut. His upper torso was bent at nearly 90 degrees, his head tilted down toward his shoulder. Decomposition had already set in enough that the muscles holding him upright had given out, letting his spine collapse. It looked impossible, like some kind of grotesque trick of the body. But it was just what happens when death has been sitting for too long. The skin was discolored, blotched with the green and gray that comes after days without life. His clothes hung loose, sagging over the thin frame beneath. The room was warm, the curtains drawn tight, and the smell was overpowering now, filling the entire space until it felt like it was pressing into us. We stood there for a while, both of us quiet, both of us taking in the scene. It wasn't the first time, not for me, not for my partner, but it never came easy. No matter how many times you see it, that first look always punches the air out of you. The silence of the room, the strange stillness of a house that should have been full of life but was instead filled with piles of forgotten things, and the weight of a body long gone. We called it in, the confirmation, the time, the location. We stayed until the coroner arrived. That part always feels longer than it is. Just waiting in that atmosphere, surrounded by the heavy air of a place where life had ended days ago. My flashlight wandered over the details because it always does. Family photos stacked on a dresser under a layer of dust. A glass of water on the nightstand half full, untouched. Shoes lined up neatly under the bed. Signs that he had once lived here normally, before it all fell into disarray. When the coroner came, they did their work, and we stood back. The body was moved carefully, respectfully. But that image, the way he had been sitting, the unnatural bend of the spine, the way his body had folded in on itself after death, that stayed burned into my mind. I'd seen death before, many times, but there was something about the silence in that room, the way he had been left sitting in the chair, that made it sit differently with me. When we finally stepped outside, back into the sunlight, it felt jarring. The air was fresh again, the world bright and alive. The street was quiet, birds in the distance, a neighbor mowing their lawn 2 houses down, completely unaware of what had just been found inside the cluttered home nearby. That contrast always struck me the hardest. Inside, the thick air of death and decay. Outside, the world carrying on as if nothing had happened. We cleared the call, wrote our reports, moved on to the next assignment. That's how the job works. You go from one thing to another. But that house stayed with me, not because of gore or anything shocking, but because of the ordinary nature of it. An elderly man, alone in his house, surrounded by the things he'd collected over his life, sitting in his chair, passing away quietly with no one there to notice until days later. The family would come eventually. They would walk through the same garage we did, through the same piles of clutter, into the same room. They would see the empty chair and know what had happened. They would fill the silence with their grief. But for me, what stayed was the stillness of the moment we found him. The strange way the body had leaned in on itself, and the heavy reminder that behind so many locked doors in quiet neighborhoods, there are stories ending just like that. That was the reality of those calls. You never knew what you were going to walk into, but more often than not, it was something like this. No dramatic crime scene, no violence, no headline. Just life, ending quietly, leaving behind a chair, a room, and an image that would stay with the ones who opened the door and found it. And as much as I tried to put it behind me, I could never forget the way the sunlight felt on my face when I walked out of that house, carrying with me the smell, the silence, and the image of a man whose story had ended in that cluttered room with no one there to see. I never imagined my life would end up the way it did. I used to be proud of the work I did. It wasn't glamorous, but it mattered to me. I showed up on time, stayed late if I had to, kept my head down, and did my job. I thought if I worked hard enough, if I stayed quiet and respectful, I'd move up over time. Maybe not to anything big, but at least to a place where I could be comfortable, respected, safe. That's all I ever wanted. Safety, a sense of belonging. I didn't know that the very place I gave so much of my energy to would be the same place that broke me. It started small, the way things like this always do. It never just explodes out of nowhere. It creeps in. At first it was just a feeling I couldn't explain, a kind of tension in the air around certain people at work. I could be on the job floor or in the break room, and there were times when I'd feel eyes on me, like someone was watching but didn't want to be caught doing it. I shrugged it off. Everyone gets paranoid sometimes, I told myself. Don't make a big deal out of nothing. But then one day a coworker came too close. At first it was just a shove, a little harder than it needed to be. We were both working in a tight space and I thought maybe it was an accident. But then I saw his face. The look in his eyes wasn't one of someone brushing past too quickly. It was deliberate, like he wanted to see how I'd react. I ignored it, told myself not to start something, but it didn't stop. The touches became more aggressive, a hand pressing down on my shoulder harder than necessary, pushing me into a wall as he passed, standing too close when he didn't need to, his breath too close to my ear. These things sound small when you say them out loud, but when you live them, when you feel trapped in a place where you can't afford to lose your job, every one of those moments weighs on you like a stone, added to a pile you have to carry all the time. I thought maybe if I didn't react, if I just kept my head down, he'd get bored and move on. That was a mistake. The day it went too far is etched in my memory with a kind of brutal clarity I can't shake. I was in a back area, away from most people. He came in behind me, and before I could even process it, he had me against the wall. His arm was across my chest, pressing me hard enough that my back hurt from the impact. I could smell his sweat, feel the heat of his breath, and no matter how much I tried to twist away, he was stronger. His other hand groped me, aggressive and humiliating. I felt this surge of panic and rage, but my body froze. It's like my brain split in half. One part of me was screaming to fight back, to throw him off, to do anything. But the other part was locked in fear, thinking if I resisted too much it would only get worse. When he finally let go, I felt sick. I could barely look at myself in the mirror later that night. I told myself I'd report him. That's what you're supposed to do, right? You go to the people in charge. You trust the system. I had no idea that what waited for me was worse. I gathered the courage to talk to the chief. It took days of building myself up, rehearsing what I'd say, making sure I didn't sound weak or confused. When I finally sat across from him, I could barely get the words out, my throat dry, my palms sweating. I explained what happened, every humiliating detail, forcing myself to stay steady. I thought I was doing the right thing, taking the right step. But what I didn't know was that I had walked straight into a trap. The chief listened, or at least pretended to. He leaned back in his chair, quiet, letting me talk, nodding every so often. But there was something in his eyes I didn't like. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I felt it, like a shadow that hadn't quite revealed itself yet. When I finished, he told me to stay after, to go over the details again privately. I didn't see the danger until it was too late. That night, when most people had cleared out, he called me into his office again. He closed the door behind me, and there was no mistaking the shift in the air. The mask of professionalism slipped. He stepped closer, too close, his hand brushing my arm in a way that made my skin crawl. Tried to step back, tried to explain that I just wanted the assault handled, but he didn't care about that. He cornered me, his body blocking the only exit. And then it happened. The very person I went to for help violated me. He forced himself on me in a way I still can't find the words for. It was worse than the first assault, because this time there was no one above him to go to. No higher authority to save me. He was the authority. After, I remember sitting in my car in the parking lot, shaking so badly I could barely put the key in the ignition. I couldn't breathe right. My chest felt tight like I was suffocating, and no matter how many times I told myself to calm down, the panic wouldn't let go. I drove home on autopilot, barely aware of the road. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying it over and over, wishing I could erase it, wishing I had fought harder, wishing I had done anything but freeze. But shame is a heavy thing. It wraps itself around you until you feel like you can't move. The days that followed were hell. I saw both of them at work carrying on like nothing happened. The co-worker smirking when he passed me. The chief pretending like he was just doing his job. I tried to avoid them, but the building felt smaller every day. Every corner I turned, I expected to see them. Every sound behind me made my skin crawl. I stopped sleeping. My appetite disappeared. I couldn't focus on anything. My performance slipped, and people noticed. But no one knew why. I was trapped, suffering in silence, terrified of speaking up because I had already learned what happened when I did. Eventually, my body broke down. The stress caught up with me, the sleepless nights, the constant fear. I started having panic attacks on the job. My hands would shake so badly I couldn't hold tools. My chest would tighten until I thought I was having a heart attack. The doctor said it was severe anxiety and PTSD. They put me on medical leave at first, but it became clear I wasn't going back. The place that had destroyed me still kept the men who hurt me. They were still there, walking the halls, collecting their paychecks, while I was the one who had to leave. I was medically retired not long after. That word, retired, makes it sound like I had a choice, like I'd put in decades of service and earned a rest. But the truth is, it was ripped away from me. My job, my sense of self, my future, all of it taken because two men decided to use me for their power and their pleasure, and because the system looked the other way. Now my days are long and quiet, too quiet sometimes. I sit with the weight of what happened, with the knowledge that they're still there. They still walk freely, still smile, still laugh, still work, like nothing ever happened. And I'm here carrying the scars, invisible to everyone else but carved deep into me. The ending isn't neat or satisfying. There was no justice, no moment where they were marched out in handcuffs, no apology that made any of it right. The truth is, I lost. They won. They kept their jobs, their reputations, their lives exactly as they wanted them. I lost mine. But I tell this story because silence is the weapon they use. Silence is what lets them stay in power. Maybe nothing will change for me, but if I put this into the world, if someone hears it, if someone understands that these things happen to men too, maybe that's something. I don't live with hope for justice anymore, but I do live with the truth. And sometimes, that's the only thing you can hold on to when everything else has been stolen. I still remember the call like it was yesterday, even though years have gone by since then. I was still new on the job at that time, barely a few months out of the academy, still trying to get used to the weight of the badge on my chest and the way every call felt bigger than I was prepared for. I had done some basic stuff, traffic stops, welfare checks, even a domestic disturbance or two, but I hadn't really seen death yet. Not up close. Not in a way that stayed with you after you went home. That all changed the day the older lady called in because her husband hadn't come in for lunch. It was a cold day. One of those days where the sky looked pale and the ground crunched under your boots. The air felt heavy, like the kind of cold that seeps through your jacket no matter how many layers you put on. I was sitting in my cruiser, parked along a county road, doing paperwork and drinking lukewarm coffee from a dented thermos, when the call came over the radio. Dispatch said an older woman was worried about her husband. He'd gone out earlier that morning to cut some wood but hadn't come back for lunch. That by itself didn't sound too unusual, but then dispatch added that the man had been diagnosed recently with a terminal illness. Something in my stomach twisted when I heard that. People in that situation sometimes made choices that no one wanted to talk about out loud. The older deputy who had been training me was already rolling, and I followed behind him. He had seen it all, or at least that's the way he carried himself. I was still green, and every time the radio lit up, my chest would tighten. The road to their property was long and narrow, cutting through empty fields and patches of bare trees. The closer we got, the more I noticed how quiet everything felt. No birds, no sound of wind through the branches, just the steady hum of the cruiser engine. When we pulled up, the house was a small farmhouse with paint peeling off the sides, the kind of place that had seen decades of hard work and weather. The barn sat a short walk behind it, old and leaning slightly to one side, its roof patched with sheets of tin. The wife came out as soon as she saw us. She was thin, bundled in a coat 2 sizes too big, her hands clutched together like she didn't know what else to do with them. Her face looked tight, like she hadn't slept in days. She pointed toward the barn, her voice thin and shaking. We followed the path to the barn, my boots crunching on the frozen ground. The deputy ahead of me moved with the kind of pace that made it clear he'd done this 100 times. I tried to keep up, though my hands felt clammy inside my gloves. The barn door creaked when we pushed it open, the hinges groaning like they hadn't been used in a while. The smell hit me first. It was a mixture of hay, old wood, dust, and something else. Something metallic and sour that made my stomach knot. Light came in through the cracks in the boards, thin and sharp, cutting through the dim space in long lines. And then I saw him. He was hanging from one of the rafters, a length of rope tied around his neck, his body swaying slightly, even though there was no breeze inside. His head was tilted at a strange angle, and his neck looked longer than it should have, stretched in a way that didn't look natural. His skin had a pale gray tint to it, and his feet and ankles were dark with blood, swollen from gravity pulling everything down. His boots barely brushed the ground. I froze. My whole body went rigid. I'd seen pictures in training, heard stories, but nothing prepared me for the real thing. The deputy beside me didn't hesitate. He moved under the man, pulling a knife from his belt, and told me, short and sharp, to grab the man's thighs and hold him steady while he cut the rope. I didn't want to move. Every part of me screamed to turn away, but I forced myself forward. The closer I got, the worse it was. I could see the deep groove in the man's neck where the rope bit into his skin, the way his tongue pushed slightly past his lips, the glassy look in his eyes that weren't really looking at anything anymore. His pants were dusty and his shirt was wrinkled, like he'd just walked out there and made up his mind to end it. My hands shook as I reached up and grabbed his thighs. His body was stiff but heavy, dead weight that pressed down against me. The deputy leaned up and cut through the rope. The sound of the rope snapping was sharp, and suddenly the man dropped. His weight came down onto me and I staggered back. He slumped over my shoulder, and that's when it happened. The air forced out of his lungs all at once, pushed through his throat and voice box. The sound that came out was like nothing I'd ever heard in my life. It wasn't a scream exactly, and it wasn't just air. It was this long, guttural moan that filled the barn, loud and unbroken, like something alive was crying out from inside him. It went on, echoing off the walls, making my skin crawl. I screamed. I couldn't help it. The sound tore right through me, and before I could stop myself, I dropped him. He hit the ground hard, folding in on himself. The moan cut off suddenly, and the barn went silent again. I stood there shaking, my hands empty, my chest heaving. I felt sick. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The older deputy just looked at me, not angry, not surprised, just tired, like he'd been here too many times before. He crouched down, checked the man quickly, and then stood back up. It was over. We still had to call it in, still had to take photos, still had to write reports. I remember standing outside the barn while the wife sobbed on the porch, her body shaking as neighbors started to arrive after word spread. My stomach twisted tighter and tighter until I leaned over and vomited in the dirt. The cold air burned my throat, and I wiped my mouth with the back of my glove. ashamed of how unsteady I was. The rest of the day blurred together. More deputies arrived. Then the coroner, then the slow process of taking the body away. The wife kept her face in her hands, her cries carrying out across the yard. I tried not to look at her, but I could still hear her voice even when I wasn't near her. She kept saying his name over and over, like she was trying to wake him up. When everything was finally done and the barn door was pulled shut again, we drove back in silence. My hand still trembled on the steering wheel of my cruiser, and I couldn't stop hearing that sound, the long, horrible moan that had come out of him. It replayed in my head on a loop, like the barn walls were still echoing inside my skull. That night I went home and sat in the dark of my apartment, staring at the wall. I didn't eat, didn't turn on the TV. I just sat there, thinking about the way his body had felt when it dropped on me. The way it wasn't just dead weight. It was a whole life that had ended. Pressed against me in that moment, the deputy who'd been with me didn't talk much about it afterward. He'd done his part, written his report, and moved on to the next call. For him, it was another day on the job. For me, it was the first time I realized what this job really meant. It wasn't just writing tickets or answering noise complaints. It was standing in barns with dead men hanging from rafters. It was carrying the weight of other people's endings on your shoulders, and it was trying to hold yourself together when the sound of death didn't let you sleep at night. I carried that call with me for a long time. I still do, even years later. When I walk into old barns or hear a rope creak under strain, that moment comes rushing back. His face, his neck stretched, his body dropping onto me, and that sound, God, that sound. I've heard a lot since then, but nothing ever like that. It was like the last piece of him forcing its way out into the world, and I was the one standing there to hear it. I screamed when it happened, and I felt ashamed for it at the time, but looking back now, I don't think anyone could have done differently. It wasn't just a sound, it was everything. His pain, his sickness, his choice, his death, all of it leaving him in one last breath. And I was the one who had to hear it. I still feel bad for both of them. For him, because he chose to go that way, alone in a barn, knowing his wife would be the one waiting for him. And for her, because she had to call us, because she had to stand outside in the cold, while we cut him down and took him away. That was the first real death I ever saw on the job. It wasn't the last, but it was the one that taught me how heavy this work really was, not just in the moment, but in all the days and nights afterward when the memories don't leave. And even now, sometimes when I'm alone, I swear I can still hear that long, awful moan echoing in my head. The sound of a man's last breath leaving his body. A sound I'll never forget as long as I live. I was working a night shift at the dispatch center, the kind of shift where hours dragged on slowly, until suddenly everything happened at once. The room was filled with the usual low hum of voices and radios, the clicking of keyboards, the occasional static popping through a line. The coffee in my cup was already cold, and I was leaning back in my chair staring at the computer screen, when my phone lit up with an incoming 911 call. The first thing I noticed was the silence. At first I thought maybe it was a pocket dial, which happens more often than people realize. Usually we get muffled voices, background noises, the sound of a TV or traffic. But this one was different. I said the usual greeting, calm and steady, identifying the line as emergency services, but there was nothing. No immediate voice. Just a faint noise like someone breathing too close to the phone. Then I heard it, a whisper, so faint I almost thought I imagined it. I asked them to repeat, to speak up if they could. What came back was fragments of words, broken pieces that didn't make much sense, like someone was trying desperately to talk but couldn't risk being overheard. I strained my ears, pressing the headset tighter against my head, trying to pick out syllables through the static and quiet. I caught the numbers of an address. Not all at once, but enough of them pieced together in fragments that I recognized the location. It was a residential street, a small house not far from where one of our units was patrolling. I typed it quickly into the system and flagged it for immediate response. My stomach had already tightened. I'd been on this job long enough to know when something felt wrong. And this wasn't just a butt dial. I kept the line open, speaking softly, trying to reassure whoever was on the other end without raising my own voice too much. I asked yes or no questions, told them to make any sound if they couldn't speak. I heard muffled noise like someone shifting around, and then the line would go quiet again. There were no full sentences, no clear explanation of what was happening. But there was enough to know this wasn't a mistake. Someone was in trouble. I watched the map on my screen update as the responding officers closed in on the address. The entire time the line stayed open. My own heart was pounding harder than I liked to admit. It wasn't the first time I'd handled a whisper call, but there was something about the silence and the way the whispers kept cutting out that made my skin crawl. It felt like whoever was calling was terrified to even breathe too loud. When the officers arrived, I listened to their radios crackle in. The first thing they reported was a male stepping out of the front door as they pulled up. I leaned closer, listening. He was calm, at least from what I could tell through the officer's voice, explaining that maybe someone had accidentally dialed 911, that there wasn't an emergency. It's not uncommon for people to try to brush things off, even when there's trouble inside a house. But I had a pit in my stomach listening to that report. Something about the caller's voice, those tiny, desperate whispers, didn't line up with an accidental dial. The officers stayed with the man on the porch, talking to him. The tone was casual enough to keep him from clamming up, but I knew they were stalling, watching him, reading his body language. I sat there tapping my pen against the desk, trying not to let impatience get the best of me. Then one of them said something that made me freeze. A hand, a tiny hand. One officer had spotted it, sticking out from a small, narrow window on the side of the house. Just a few pale fingers waving, barely visible, but there all the same. That detail made my hair stand on end instantly. It wasn't dramatic, not a scream, not banging against glass, just that small, almost hopeless little signal for help. The officers moved fast after that. The tone over the radio changed completely. Voices clipped, sharp, urgent. They went inside. I sat there gripping the edge of my desk, staring at the screen as if I could see through it into that house. Minutes passed, though they felt much longer. I still had the original line open, though by now it was silent. On the other end, I thought I could hear muffled movement, maybe voices raised, but it was hard to separate from the static and the pounding in my ears. When the update came through, my chest felt tight. They had found her. The woman who had called was inside, badly beaten. She had been forced into a room, confined, unable to leave. She had managed to get to her phone somehow, to make that whispering call. She had been the one sticking her hand out that tiny window, desperate to let someone know she was there. The man, the one who had come out acting calm, pretending there was no problem, was immediately taken into custody, charged with forcible confinement, among other things. Hearing the details later only made the whole thing sink in deeper. She had been held there, cut off from help, terrified enough to whisper into a phone line because speaking too loud could have meant more violence. I thought about how easily the whole thing could have gone differently if I hadn't caught that address through the whispers, if the officers hadn't spotted her hand, if we had believed the man when he said there was nothing wrong. I remember finishing that shift, sitting in my car afterward before driving home, just staring through the windshield at the empty lot. The whole call replayed in my head over and over again, each fragment of whisper, each pause on the line. I couldn't shake the image of those fingers reaching out of that window, so small against the frame, the kind of detail that said everything without a single word. Even now, it sticks with me. I've taken thousands of calls, some worse in terms of violence, some more chaotic with people screaming, but that one stands out. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, fragile, the kind of quiet that tells you someone's life is balancing on the edge of something terrible. And the thought that if one thing had gone differently, if her call had dropped, if we hadn't listened closely enough. If the officers had driven off believing the man's story, she might still be trapped in that house. That thought never leaves me. It makes my hair stand up even now, years later, because I realize that night could have been the end of her story. But it wasn't. She got out. She was saved. And that's the part I hold on to, even with the images that still sit in the back of my mind every time the phone rings. I still remember the morning we got called out for that job. It was one of those mornings where everything felt a little too quiet, like the city hadn't woken up yet. The air was cold and still, the kind of air that makes you see your breath even though the sun is already up. I hadn't had a proper coffee yet, just one of those quick sips from a lukewarm cup on the counter before running out the door. I didn't think anything of it at the time. Just another early call, just another job. That's how I treated it. But it didn't turn out that way. The address was in one of those older parts of town, streets lined with weather-beaten houses that all looked the same from a distance. Paint peeling off the wood, half-rusted gutters, curtains drawn even though it was morning. The kind of place where time feels slower, where the nights stretch out longer than anywhere else. We pulled up and the place looked quiet, almost too quiet. No sound of traffic, no kids yelling, no dogs barking. Just this stillness that sat heavy in the air. Walking up to the house, I noticed the garden hadn't been touched in months. Overgrown grass, weeds creeping up through the cracks in the path. Old cigarette butts scattered in clumps near the steps. It gave the whole place a neglected feel, like no one cared anymore. The front door was half open, not wide, but just enough to make it feel wrong, like whoever went through it last didn't have the energy to close it all the way. We stepped inside, and it smelled like old smoke, mixed with damp air. Not the sharp smell of fresh cigarettes, but the deep stale stink of years of smoking inside. The walls had that yellow film, the one you only get when smoke sticks around long enough to become part of the paint. Every surface felt tired, worn down. The carpet had stains so dark they looked permanent, the kind that don't come out no matter how many times you scrub. There were clothes tossed around, some empty bottles on the counter, and a general mess that said the person living here hadn't cared about tidiness in a long time. His mom met us in the hall. She looked pale, like she hadn't slept at all, and her hands kept twitching, moving without purpose, like she didn't know what to do with them. She didn't say much, just nodded toward the bedroom. Her face looked drained, like she'd already spent all her emotions before we even got there. That kind of numbness is its own kind of scream. The bedroom was small, barely enough room for the bed, a wardrobe, and a bedside table. The blinds were down, letting in only thin streaks of morning light that cut across the room like sharp lines. The first thing I saw was him on the floor, flat on his back, arms and legs twisted upward, bent and stiff in a way that made my stomach clench. His body was locked tight in rigor mortis, every joint stiff, every angle unnatural. He looked like a dead bug flipped on its back, stuck in that crawling position but motionless. It didn't look peaceful. It didn't look like rest. It looked bizarre, wrong, like something had gone against the way a body is supposed to be. The bedside table told the story. The top drawer was still half open, and you could see where he'd collapsed into it. His head must have gone straight down into it, and when his body lost its strength, he just stayed there, wedged in the wrong position. The weight of him pressing against the edge of the drawer had left a mark across his neck, a pale white strip where the pressure had been. The rest of his face and throat were red, swollen, heavy with the blood that had been cut off. At a glance, it almost looked like his throat had been slit, just because of the stark contrast between the deep red and that sharp pale line. But it wasn't a cut. It was the drawer holding him in place. The drawer that stopped him from moving. The drawer that finished him. The strange part was how ordinary the rest of the room looked. Dirty clothes in a heap in the corner. A few wrappers and empty bottles on the dresser. An old poster peeling off the wall. Nothing that screamed death except for him. That made it worse somehow. It was just a normal bedroom. And in the middle of it was this frozen, broken scene. His arms were bent upward, elbows locked, hands curled half into fists. His legs were bent too, knees up but stiff, toes pointed. There was no softness in the way he lay. He was stuck in that final spasm, as if his body had fought right until the end, and then just froze in place. Seeing that at 7 in the morning burned something into me. I don't think will ever fade. The smell in the room wasn't the heavy rot you sometimes get when someone has been down for days. This was fresher. There was still that faint sharpness of chemical sweat, the kind that comes when the body pushes everything out in its last fight. You could smell the stale smoke, the faint sweet tang of spilled liquor somewhere, the faint sourness of unwashed sheets. But under it all, there was that hint of something final, the smell you only get when a body has crossed that line from alive to gone. I tried not to look too long at his face, but it's hard not to. His mouth was half open, lips dry and cracked. His eyes were glazed, not wide, not shut, just stuck half open in that blank stare that doesn't look at anything. The drawer had pressed into his throat so hard that the skin above and below puffed up around it. It made his face look distorted, like something was pulling it out of shape. That's what stayed with me. Not just that he was dead, but the strange, unnatural way death had twisted him. His mom had dragged him away from the drawer before we got there. You could see the faint drag marks on the carpet, the angle where his body had been pulled out and left on the floor. She hadn't straightened him out, hadn't tried to make him look better. He was left exactly how he had died, just shifted a few feet over. I think that was the part that sank in deepest. It wasn't peaceful, it wasn't arranged. It was raw, unfiltered, the exact way it happened. We didn't speak much while we were there. There wasn't anything to say. It was all about the details, writing things down, checking times, recording what we saw. The quiet weight of the room made everything feel heavier, like even moving was wrong, like the air itself was pushing down. Every sound felt too loud, every movement out of place. When the undertakers arrived, it felt like the atmosphere shifted. They moved with a kind of grim professionalism. Not rushing, not dragging, just doing what they had to do. But the part I'll never forget was the sound when they started straightening him out. His joints were locked tight, every angle stiff with rigor mortis. When they tried to move him flat, the sound was like cracking branches, dull pops and snaps as the locked muscles gave way. It wasn't violent, but it was loud enough to cut straight through the silence. That sound drilled into me deeper than anything else. It was the sound of his body losing its fight, the sound of death settling in for good. They worked methodically, carefully, but there's no way to make that part gentle. Watching them straighten him, hearing those noises, seeing his stiff limbs forced down into a stretcher position, it stuck with me. Even after they covered him, even after they carried him out, the sound lingered in my head. Once he was gone, the room felt empty, but not in a peaceful way. It felt stripped bare, like all that was left was the aftermath, the faint smell, the drawer still hanging open, the mark on the carpet where he had lain. His mom sat on the edge of the couch in the other room, staring at nothing. She didn't cry, didn't move, just sat there hollow. Walking back outside into the morning felt strange. The sun was up, the birds were singing. People on the next street were probably just having breakfast, starting their day like nothing was wrong. But all I could see was him, stuck in that bizarre position, arms and legs raised. His throat marked white against red, and the way his body cracked as they forced him flat. That morning carved itself into me in a way I don't think will ever leave. It wasn't the blood, it wasn't the scene, it wasn't even the death itself. It was the way it all looked so bizarre, so unnatural, and yet so final. It was seeing how a normal room, a normal morning, a normal house could hold something that wrong. It was the sound of joints breaking their stiffness, the sight of a body locked in its last position. I've seen a lot of things, but that one sits with me the heaviest. Because it wasn't horror in the way people think of it. Wasn't violent or messy or dramatic. It was quiet. It was still. It was a life that ended in a way no one expects, in a position no one could imagine, frozen in time until we arrived. And I know no matter how many years go by, I'll always carry that morning with me. The strangest part is that there was no big moment of closure, no sense of it being wrapped up. He was taken. The room left as it was, the smell still lingering in the air. Life outside kept going, normal as ever. But for me, that image, that sound, that stillness, it's all locked in place the same way his body was locked when we found him. That's the ending. That's the part that doesn't fade. I had been on plenty of calls before, and I had seen more wrecks than I could count. Most of them looked bad but turned out survivable. Others didn't look too bad from the outside, but left no chance for the people inside. You start to learn not to assume. That night was one of those calls that felt routine at first, but ended up becoming something I still think about even now. It was late after dark when the call came in. A single vehicle crash out in the county. Rural stretch of road I had been on 100 times. It was the kind of area where the fields stretch out on both sides, broken up by fences and patches of trees. At night it's nothing but blackness outside your headlights. The dispatcher gave the location, said the report was a vehicle that had left the road and rolled. No other cars involved. No witnesses who had seen it happen. Just someone driving past who spotted a car down past a fence line and called it in. By the time I got there, another unit was already parked near the ditch. The car was about 30 feet off the road, down in the field. The fence had been torn apart, splintered wood and wire pushed out. The path of the car easy to follow. You could see where the tires left the road, dipped into the ditch, and then the ground scars where it rolled. It looked like at least 3 full rolls before it landed. The car came to rest upright, front end buried a little in the dirt. Windshield shattered, roof dented, glass all around. We worked our way down with flashlights. The night was still, no sound but the buzzing of insects. It had that heavy feeling country nights sometimes have, where the air feels thick and you hear every little sound around you. The smell of coolant and gasoline was strong when I got close. The driver was still inside. He was mangled bad, slumped over the wheel, body twisted in ways it shouldn't have been. His face was bloody, hair matted with it, shirt torn open. His legs were pinned down awkwardly, and I could see the seat had buckled under him. His chest wasn't moving. His eyes were half open but fixed. I've seen death before, and this looked like death. The paramedic leaned in, checked like they always do, went through the steps, felt for a pulse. After a few minutes, he looked back and shook his head. The man was gone. There wasn't any doubt in his face. We treated it like we always do. The scene got secured, markers set, lights kept on. Nothing rushed now. When there's no one left to save, the whole pace changes. It becomes about documentation, about making sure the coroner can do their work, about safety for the people on the scene. We waited. I kept looking at the wreck, the crushed frame, the shattered glass. There's a stillness that hangs over a wreck after everyone knows the driver is gone. The flashing lights feel louder than normal. The night heavier. Nobody says much. Just the sounds of radios, boots in the grass, the occasional car passing far up the road. It took a while, but the coroner's van arrived. The coroner came down with his bag, went straight to the car, flashlight beam cutting across the broken interior. He worked slow and steady like they do, documenting, taking photos, writing notes. He confirmed what we already knew: dead. That word always settles in heavy when it's official, even if you already expected it. I drifted back toward the van with a couple of the others. We stood around in the dark, talking in low voices, keeping an eye on the scene but letting the coroner do his work. The car was maybe 20 feet from where we were standing, still lit up by our scene lights. The body slumped behind the shattered glass. I kept glancing at it without really thinking, just the way you do. It had been maybe 20 minutes since the coroner started. We were talking about how bad the rollover must have been, about how lucky nobody else was on the road at the time. It was routine talk, the kind you do just to fill the silence. And then it happened. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks, the way shadows shift when lights are flashing. But then I realized it wasn't a trick. The driver, the man who had been declared dead by 2 professionals, sat up, his head lifted, his back straightened, blood still covering his face. He looked around like someone waking up in a strange place. His body shifted against the seat, his arms moving stiffly, jerky but alive. I froze, every muscle in me locked. My heart slammed so hard in my chest I thought it would knock me backward. For a second I couldn't process what I was seeing. I had stared at that body for nearly an hour. I had seen the stillness, the emptiness. I had accepted death was in that car. And now he was sitting upright, alive. I wasn't the only one who saw it. The others with me all reacted at the same time. We all jumped back like the ground had opened beneath us, stumbling, cursing, hands up like we'd seen something impossible. I felt my throat go dry. Every hair on my arm stood on end. Before anyone could move, I heard the faint sound of an engine turning over. It was soft at first, then louder. The car itself, crumpled and twisted, coughed as the starter caught. Somehow, unbelievably, he was trying to start the car. A moment later, it came to life, sputtering rough but running. The headlights flickered weakly. One of them smashed, but the other glowing pale across the field. The whole wreck shuddered with the vibration. It was the most surreal thing I had ever witnessed. A man who had been declared dead, now sitting upright, blood-soaked inside a destroyed car that had no business starting again. The coroner himself was standing there stunned, notebook in hand, staring like the ground had betrayed him. None of us moved for what felt like a long time, though it could only have been seconds. Training finally kicked in. The paramedic was the first to rush back toward the car, shouting for equipment, motioning for the stretcher. The rest of us followed, fumbling, disoriented, trying to get ourselves under control. It was chaos for a moment. Everyone moving at once, nobody fully believing what they were doing. But the driver was alive, and that meant everything changed. We worked frantically to get him out, cutting metal, stabilizing what we could. The smell of gasoline and exhaust was sharp in the air, smoke rising from the battered hood. His breathing was ragged but there, his pulse faint but there. He was in terrible shape, injuries everywhere, blood loss heavy, bones broken. But against everything we had seen and everything we thought we knew, he was alive. When they loaded him into the ambulance, I stood back, sweat running cold down my back, my hands still trembling. The flashing lights strobed across the field, the wreck sitting there idling like some kind of cruel joke. The coroner stood off to the side, face pale, expression unreadable. Nobody said much. Nobody had the words. Later, there were reports, investigations, questions about how it happened, how two trained professionals could miss signs of life. Explanations were given, medical talk about faint pulses, shallow breathing, injuries masking everything. They called it rare, but not impossible. I listened, but deep down, the explanations never made it any less unreal in my mind. I had seen death and life trade places in front of me. I can still see it now, clear as the night it happened. The broken fence, the twisted car, the body slumped lifeless. Then the impossible sight of it rising, bloodied eyes blinking open. The cough of the engine, the glow of a lone headlight. The way every single one of us leapt back like children afraid of the dark. The man lived. That's the part that matters most. He survived injuries that should have taken him. He walked away from a moment everyone had already accepted as his end. For him it was life again. For me it was a reminder that nothing is ever as certain as we think it is. That even in the middle of routine, even when you believe you've seen it all, the world can still hand you something that makes your blood run cold and your heart skip in your chest. I drove home that night hours later. The road empty, the fields dark. The silence felt heavier than normal, like the night itself was holding its breath. I couldn't stop replaying it in my head, over and over. The way he sat up, the way the car came alive. I knew I'd never forget it. Some calls fade with time, faces blur, details slip away. Not this one. This one stayed sharp, burned into me like the afterimage of a flash. Every time I pass that stretch of road now, I see the broken fence in my mind, the scar in the dirt where the car rolled. And I think about how close life and death can really be, how easily we can mistake one for the other, how fragile the line is that separates them. That night taught me something I never wanted to know but can't unlearn. Death isn't always what it looks like, and sometimes against everything you think you know, a man you thought was gone forever opens his eyes, sits up, and reminds you that the impossible can be real. I still remember the smell that night. It wasn't just the dust or the mildew of the old house. It wasn't just the heavy mix of sweat, burnt cigarettes, and whatever drugs had been cooked or smoked inside those walls. It was the smell of adrenaline, the metallic edge of fear that rises in the back of your throat when you know you're about to step into something dangerous. It clung to me from the moment we staged up outside until long after I'd turned in my badge. We'd been planning the warrant for weeks. Intel came down that the house was a distribution point. Mid-level dealers, not just users, moving product in and out. It was the kind of place where stolen guns and stolen lives tended to pile up. The briefing laid it out plain. No knock, early hours, hit it hard and fast before anyone inside had time to react. That was the tactic. That was what I signed up for. It was just after 2 a.m. when we staged on the street. Dark and quiet except for the low hum of our engines as we killed the lights. A rundown single-story house sat crooked at the end of the block. Wood siding peeling, porch light burned out. A chain-link fence sagged along the yard, half of it missing panels. The place looked like 100 others I'd been in, but my stomach was already twisted. We stacked on the door. First guy had the ram. The signal came down in whispers. Then the thunder of steel on wood, the door crashing inward. A blast of stale heat rolled out into the night. The first officer surged through, gun up, voice booming commands. I fell into the line. Fourth man in. Moving exactly the way we drilled 100 times before. Muscle memory carried me, but my heart was hammering. Hard enough I thought it might show through the vest. Inside was chaos. People shouted, bodies scrambled, lights flicked on as shadows ran. The first officer snatched the guy by the door, forcing him down. Second grabbed another trying to bolt for the kitchen. Third locked down a woman halfway to the window. Then came my turn. The man I was supposed to secure wasn't staying put. He bolted the moment I came through. Bare feet slapping on the linoleum, arms pumping. I went after him without a thought. Training drilled it into me. Don't lose your suspect, don't let him regroup, don't let him reach for something. He cut down a hallway, dark and narrow, and I followed with my light bouncing off the walls. He dove into a room and slammed the door hard enough the frame shook. I didn't hesitate. I hit the door with my shoulder, wood splintering, hinges whining, and I stumbled in after him. My weapon was up, adrenaline blinding me to anything except his shape. He went down against the far wall. I was on him in a second, tackling him to the ground, knee in his back, his arms twisted under him. He thrashed, but I outweighed him. I forced him down, panting, my gloves slick against his sweat. Then I noticed it, his right arm jammed tight under the bed, fingers clawing for something. He wouldn't let go. I leaned harder, pressing him flat, jerking his arm free. The struggle burned through me, my mind screaming that something was wrong. Finally, I got his hands behind his back, pinned them, and held them there. He kept twisting his head, shouting words I didn't hear, and I dragged him to his feet and shoved him back toward the living room. By then, the others had most of the suspects corralled. They were cuffed on the ground, angry, shouting, some crying. I pushed mine down with the others, checked the zip ties, and stepped away. But my head wouldn't let it go. That arm under the bed, the way he wouldn't let go. Something sat heavy in my chest. I turned back down the hallway, retraced my steps to the room. My light cut across the mess inside. Clothes piled in corners, mattress sagging half off the frame, trash and empty cans littered across the floor. My boots crunched on glass. I knelt by the bed, heart pounding, and angled the beam into the darkness beneath. That's when I saw it, a sawed-off shotgun, double-barreled, the wood stock hacked short, barrels jagged at the cut. It was close enough I could have reached it without stretching. Close enough that he could have pulled it out in one quick motion if I had been a second slower. I froze, staring. My chest felt tight like my vest was strangling me. My hand shook as I pulled it out carefully, laying it across my knees. The steel was cold. I flipped the latch and broke it open. 2 shells sat heavy in the chambers. Not birdshot, not buck. Slugs, fat hunks of metal built to punch through doors, cars, people. I sat there for a long second, just breathing, the noise of the other officers distant. My mouth was dry and my hands felt weak. I tried to picture what would have happened if he'd pulled it free, if I'd been a second slower, if I hadn't pinned his arms the way I did. I saw it too clearly. Flash. A deafening blast. The kind of impact that doesn't give second chances. I don't remember standing, but I carried it back to the living room, set it on the table, snapped photos, logged it. My voice sounded strange in my own ears, flat, like I was underwater. The others didn't seem to notice. To them, it was just another piece of evidence, another gun pulled from another house. But I knew what it meant. We cleared the house, bagged the evidence, loaded the suspects. The whole operation was by the book. On paper, it was a success. No shots fired, no injuries, weapons and drugs seized, arrests made. But my hands wouldn't stop trembling. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying it over and over. The moment he went under the bed, the way my weight barely kept him down, the cold steel of the shotgun in my hands after, I wondered if he would have fired. I wondered if I'd be alive if he had gotten that chance. I tried to tell myself I reacted right, that I did my job. But all I felt was the hollow thud of what could have been. Sleep never came. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it again. The hallway, the struggle, the barrels aimed at me. 2 nights without rest. 2 nights hearing the sound of an imaginary blast in my ears. 2 nights feeling the phantom kick of buckling knees and fading sight. My body was safe, but my mind was somewhere else, caught in the grip of what almost happened. I kept working for 3 more weeks. Calls came in. Warrants came down. I put the uniform on, strapped the vest, carried the rifle. But I wasn't the same. Every knock at a door made my chest tighten. Every dark hallway felt like it was hiding something waiting for me. Every time a suspect reached down or shoved a hand into a pocket, my pulse spiked so high I thought I might pass out. I tried to bury it, to push through. I told myself it was just part of the job, that everyone carried a close call. But when I looked at my reflection in the locker room mirror, I saw the truth in my own eyes. I wasn't there anymore. My head wasn't clear, my focus wasn't steady. And in this line of work, that gets you or someone else killed. So I made the decision. The day I handed in my badge, I felt a strange mix of shame and relief. I thought about the years of training, the oath I swore, the brothers and sisters I worked beside. Walking away felt like failure, but keeping the badge when I knew I couldn't do it anymore, that would have been worse. I left because of that night, because of that shotgun, because I learned in one single quiet moment under a bed that the line between life and death is thinner than anyone wants to believe. And I couldn't stand on that line anymore. That's the truth. That's the call that ended it for me. Even now, years later, I still see it when I close my eyes. A dark room, a hand under a bed, the glint of cold steel waiting for me. A choice that wasn't mine but could have been. I'm alive because of seconds, because of weight and angle and luck. I walked away from law enforcement, but that moment never walked away from me. That's how it really ended. Not with a shot, not with blood on the floor, but with the silence of what almost happened, and the sound of me deciding I couldn't keep gambling on it again. I still remember the call like it happened yesterday. It came in the middle of the day, a normal shift that had been dragging along without much to it. We had done the usual rounds, checked on a few routine things. Paperwork stacked up back at the office waiting for us. Then the call came through, a welfare check. A woman, middle-aged, lived alone, kept to herself, had 3 dogs. Neighbors hadn't seen her in days. No answer at the door, mail piling up. Something wasn't right. Those kinds of calls were never fun. More often than not, they ended up being exactly what you thought they might be. Someone who had passed away quietly inside their home without anyone knowing until the signs became impossible to ignore. They were a part of the job, but they always stayed with you. My colleague and I drove out to the address. It wasn't far. A suburban area where the houses were built close enough to each other for the neighbors to notice things, but not so close that anyone really knew what went on inside. As we pulled up, I noticed right away the blinds on the front windows were drawn tight. The mailbox was crammed with letters and flyers. Trash bins hadn't been put out. The grass was overgrown in that uneven way that told you it hadn't been touched in weeks. It had that heavy stillness about it, the kind that made your gut already start preparing for what you might find. We knocked on the front door a few times, called out her name, tried the handle. Nothing. The only sound was muffled movement inside. Dogs. I could hear them barking, nails clicking against the floor, frantic. Dogs always made these situations worse. They were loyal, confused, hungry, stressed. If their owner had been gone, or worse, lying somewhere in that house, then they'd been left to fend for themselves. That never turned out clean. We gave it a few more minutes, tried a neighbor who came out to stand on the lawn across the street watching. They confirmed they hadn't seen her in a while, that it wasn't like her. No family came by, no visitors. It was time to go in. We forced entry through the front door. As soon as it cracked open, the sound of the dogs exploded. 3 of them, mid-sized, a mix of breeds, all in a state of panic. Their barking was loud, echoing through the house. They rushed at us at first, but pulled up short, nervous, unsure. Their eyes darted everywhere, their bodies tense. You could see the stress on them right away. The smell hit almost immediately. Anyone who's been in a place where someone's been dead for some time knows it. It's not just one smell. It's a mix of decay, rot, stale air, and something chemical that clings to your clothes and your skin. Even with the windows closed and the dogs pacing the rooms, it hung in the air, thick and heavy. My stomach tightened the second I caught it. I'd smelled it before. You never forget it. We stepped inside carefully, trying to calm the dogs enough so we could move. The house was dim, shades drawn. Daylight filtered in pale strips across the furniture. Things looked normal at first glance. Shoes by the door, dishes in the sink, TV remote on the arm of a chair. The kind of lived-in clutter you expect. But the smell told us what we were going to find, and it didn't take long. The living room was in the center of the house, not far from the entry. That's where I saw it. At first, I couldn't even place what I was looking at. There was the couch, cushions sagging, a blanket crumpled on one side. And then this thing sticking up from it right in the middle like a post or a branch. Didn't make sense. I froze, squinted at it, walked a few steps closer. My brain couldn't connect the pieces right away. It was pale, rigid, standing upright out of the couch. I circled it once, then twice. That's when it hit me. It wasn't wood. It wasn't anything but bone. The spine. A human spine. Her spine. The realization came hard and cold. The upper body was there, slumped back into the couch, head tilted in a way that no living head could tilt. The midsection was gone, most of it eaten, torn away. The skin and tissue that remained barely held the upper torso to what was left of the legs. Those legs had been pulled up, dragged unnaturally over toward the head, twisted so the spine had arched and stood straight out of what used to be a body. The sight was something out of the worst corners of reality. Not staged, not imagined. Just the brutal aftermath of time and desperation. The dogs left with nothing but her. I didn't say anything for a long moment. My colleague stood behind me, silent too. We both just looked, taking in what was left. The strange, terrible posture of the remains. The dogs paced the edges of the room, panting, barking in bursts, whining. Their agitation told the rest of the story. They'd been here, trapped with her as the days passed, as hunger overcame whatever bond or hesitation they had. It was survival. It was horrific. But it was what happened. We went through the motions after that because we had to. Checked the rest of the house. Bedroom, empty bed. Bathroom, no one there. Kitchen, only dirty plates and a trash bin overflowing. Nothing else unusual. The living room was the scene. We called it in. Waited for the right people to arrive. The process was clinical, even if the image would never leave. The dogs were removed, taken into care. The remains were carefully handled, what was left of them. We gave our statements, explained what we had seen, answered the questions. There were no signs of anyone else involved. No break-in, no struggle, no foul play. Just a woman who had died alone. Her body discovered too late, and 3 dogs that had been left without food until instinct drove them to her. By the time the body was gone, the house was quiet again. Empty, but for the smell that hung on. The cleaning crew was scheduled to come. We left, heavy with the weight of it, already trying to shake it off even though we knew we wouldn't. You tell yourself it's part of the job, but there are always scenes that stick harder, images that play back when you close your eyes at night. This was one of them. It wasn't until we were halfway back to the office that it struck us. We ran through in our heads everything we had seen, what was taken, what wasn't. Something was missing. The pelvis. Neither of us had seen it. Not on the couch, not on the floor. Not dragged into a corner or hidden beneath a blanket. The legs had been there, twisted up, but the pelvis was gone. Completely gone. We exchanged a look, silent agreement passing between us. The dogs. They must have consumed it entirely. Bone, tissue, everything. It was the only explanation. We didn't want the cleaning crew to stumble across a hidden piece of her, so we turned the car around, went back. The house was darker now, the sun slipping lower. We went through it again, slow, methodical. Checked every corner, every piece of furniture, under the couch, behind it, in the kitchen, the bedroom. Nothing. The pelvis wasn't there. It hadn't been overlooked. It hadn't been dragged aside. It was gone, fully consumed. The dogs had finished it. Standing in that silent house again, with the smell pressing down and the image of the spine jutting out still burned into my head, I felt the full weight of it settle. There was nothing left to do. The job was done. The remains were what they were. The cleaning crew would come and clear what we couldn't. Life would move on, though not for her and not for those dogs who had done what they had to. When we left the second time, the sun was nearly gone. The house looked normal from the outside, just another house on a quiet street. But I knew I would never forget what was inside. Not the couch, not the spine, not the silence afterward, and especially not the missing pelvis. Proof of just how far survival can drive a creature, even the ones closest to us. That was the end of it. No mystery, no foul play, no twist beyond the terrible reality of it. Just death and the aftermath left behind. Some calls fade with time. That one never did.